Last time we finished up by allowing the user to cancel changes to a record. Let me just launch this here real quick. And if I put a bunch of stuff in here and then go, whoops, that was the wrong person, and maybe I even make a mistake and can't figure out how to solve it, I can't save because there's markers on the form. When we get done, you won't even be able to exit because there's errors on the form. So the cancel button is our solution. And really all we did in the cancel button is we did put a warning in there. I'm not sure I like that. Whether you put one in your programs or not is up to you. That's kind of an optional one. If you want to warn them before they throw away their changes. Eric, can you reach that outside light switch? Thank you. If you want to warn them, you may. Otherwise, you just leave the warning out and you do it. And if they didn't mean to click that button, they go, oops, and they fix it again. So the warning is here. Everything goes back, but notice my error marker is also gone. So the code for that, pretty straightforward. Really, it was just 2 lines before we added the confirmation. Grid select changed. We're forcing that event to pretend like the user picked a different row in the grid. So this causes that event to occur, which goes back out to the database, gets what's in the database, which hasn't changed yet, brings it back in again, displays it on the form. This gets rid of the error markers. And then the dialog response you've seen before in your other programs, just wrapped it around that to make sure the user really wants to cancel. Questions about that? Okay. Then the next thing we want to take a look at is deleting records. First off, in a lot of databases, deleting is a bad idea. Why would you delete a record? If it's a shopping cart type thing, maybe the record was put in by mistake and you want to delete it. If you're adding a new person to the employee database and whoops, they changed their mind before we did anything else, they're gone already, maybe we delete them. But in general, deleting is deleting history. And it might not be such a great idea to delete. But I give the user the opportunity. We'll once again verify that's really what they want to do. And once again, whenever we do database processing, we have to go through our 3 steps. We're going to start with the data class, then teach the business class to submit the command, and finally make the GUI ask the business class to do its work. So we're going to go back into the XSD and add the ability, a new query, because all the queries we have so far is a select query, which gets data. We have an update query, which updates records. Those are not the same commands for deleting records. So I need to go into the XSD. Again, I'm deleting all fields. So I'm going to use this table adapter. Remember, every combination of fields that you need needs its own XSD, its own table adapter, excuse me. So here I only wanted 3 fields. I have a new table adapter. Here I have all the fields. For your programs, particularly in Unit 3, you should only need the 2. But in future programs, you might need a different combination, a different set of tables. Unit 4 will add a little bit more to this and have lots of table adapters. But the thing to remember is if you need a different set of fields, you need a new table adapter. In this case, we're deleting all fields, if you will. So I'm going to add a new record, same way we did update. I'm going to right-click, add a query, not a new record, a query. Yes, I'm using SQL. And once again, I've got choices, and here's my delete. So the wizard already knows how to delete records. Next, oh my goodness. Well, we saw all that before, right? This is all extra overhead, overkill that Visual Studio has to put in because they can't anticipate how your database is set up. But we know that if I give you an order ID number, there's only one, and only one record will be deleted. So I don't need any of the rest of this stuff. That was too much. Just like we did before, find the first word and. It's the same thing we did with the update query. Find the first word and delete everything after it. You'll have one extra parenthesis next to the where. And that's the delete command. In RDD, you'll learn about that in the 4th SQL unit. You just say delete a record, with a where clause that tells us which record, or records, in this case, we're using the ID, so there's only one. Again, there's a question mark, so whenever we call this delete query, we're going to have to provide it an ID. This is, again, optional. I like to rename it. I'm deleting an order. Really doesn't matter much whether you rename it or not. And I expect one blue check mark. There it is. Your delete command is appropriate. Finish. If that blue check mark doesn't show up, you probably left out the parenthesis. The deleting of that excess parenthesis, it's probably still there. Just go find it and get rid of it. Again, Visual Studio helps me out, makes this wider than it needs to be. But here's my delete order query. I have to send it an ID every time. Save all. Back to the class now. I need to create a delete record method. So I have a get record underneath there. Again, I'm accessing data, so I'm going to put it into the data region. Uh-oh, lost my keyboard. Weird. Won't let me put it above there. Okay, so I need a new one. Again, it's going to be public. It's going to be void because it doesn't return anything. It goes to the database, deletes the record, says I'm done. That's it. I don't even have to send it anything. Because when I tell a record, when I tell a pizza order, when I tell an order, delete yourself, is basically what I'm saying. Delete the record. It already has the ID number. Remember that our order ID has currently a member called order ID in it. So I don't have to tell it which order to delete. It's deleting the one that's currently in our an order record. So no additional information needs to be sent in. Give it a nice description before I forget. And in here, we've always, whenever you're accessing that database from the business class, we always need a table adapter. You can pretty much steal this from all the others because it's all the same. TA, which is a new DS order table adapters. Which one do we want? This is the part you have to be careful when you steal. I don't want the query. I want the big one on the left. You have to designate which table adapter. Again, I don't need a data table because no data is coming out of the database. So I don't need one of those DTs that we had when we were getting. Here's that DT. I don't need one of those. So now I'm ready to issue the command ta.delete order. And then I have to give it which order? The current one. So whatever's in my order ID member, go find that record in the database, delete it. That's it, I believe. Locate the where clause, TA delete order with the order ID. So that's it, pretty simple little method. We now have to invoke it from the right place in the GUI. So I'm going to the form, double click the delete button, put this where it belongs. One subtle little thing, I'm not trying not to be terribly picky about it this year when I look at your descriptions. The GUI doesn't delete anything. So delete button. You might say this method deletes the record from the, not really. It asks the business class to do it. Business class then tells the data class to do it, and so on. Inside here, for deleting, I think I definitely want to have some kind of a response. So I'm going to copy that. Wow. If they say yes, then delete that record from the business class and order dot delete. Let's get rid of Ryan Braun's record. Delete. There's my message. Are you sure? Okay, now this is Ryan Braun on 2/13/12. I try to help me remember that. Sure you want to delete this record? Yes. What happened? He didn't go away. He didn't leave the grid. Well, first of all, the grid is not tied to the database in any way. It is a copy of the database when we started this program. Since we didn't delete it from here, it's not going away from here. But Ryan Braun on February 13th of 2012, let's go look in the database and see if it's still there. Now here's where you have to be careful. If you look in this database, he'll still be there. This is not the one that your program was executing against. Every time you recompile your program, makes a copy of that database and puts it in here, in the debug folder, along with your executable. Unless we say otherwise, this executable has to be in the same folder with the database. It's generally not a problem. If I look inside this database, there's my pizza orders table, and I want Ryan Braun, so let's go into here and just give me Braun. No 213. It's gone. But again, there's no feedback. And last time I talked about how it's really nice to get some kind of feedback when I run that program. But I am going to get feedback. When I finally get done with this, the record's going to disappear from the grid and the one that's showing on the screen will change to go with it. So at this point, at least I've verified that it's deleting the record and that it's gone. One other little trick here off on the side. When I display my dialog box, I get a yes/no button. Which button, to be safe, should be the default button? By default, it's the leftmost button. There's a fifth option here that we haven't used before after the icon, and that's which default button do you want? And it's telling me message box icon. But I'm going to go the message box default button. And goofy enough, they're numbered 1, 2, 3, not 0, 1, 2, not yes, no, cancel. Those are numbered left to right, so I want button number 2 to be the default. Oh, wait a minute. Where'd he come from? I'll explain it to you in a second. If I click delete, Notice the no button is lit up. So if the user just presses enter, he's answering no, and it'll leave him. So the user's got to go out of their way to click on the yes button or use the shift tab key or something. Something like this where you want the default button to be no. You can set it in the dialog box. Tell the dialog box, pick the second button. Just to make sure, make the user go a little out of their way to click the yes button to really blow this thing away. Okay, now why did that record come back? I'm going to skip ahead here for a second. Non-persistent data changes. When you make changes to your program while it's running, that copy of the database that's there with the executable is the one that you're using. So if you delete 50 records, they go out of the one in the debug folder. If you change records, they are changed in the debug folder. Visual Studio has this cool feature, I think it's a feature, that every time you recompile your program, remember what recompile means, I changed something, I just recompiled because I added a default button to my message box. Created a new set of ones and zeros. Whenever you change your code, the next time you run, Visual Studio by default takes the copy of the database that's in the project folder. Remember that one? And it automatically copies it into the bin debug folder. Automatically. So every time you're in there and you're testing and you're deleting records and you're changing records, and then you go, that's not quite right. Tweak a couple things, rerun it, you come back, all your data's still there. The original database is always stored in the project folder, and every time you do a build or a run and something has changed, you have to change something. If you haven't changed the code, then it doesn't make a new copy, only when you change. I think that's awesome. So I can go in there and delete all kinds of records, and if it didn't work quite right, it didn't delete enough, it deleted too many, I can run the exact same test the next time I run the program because the data gets refreshed back to the original. I don't recommend you change it, but if you really don't like that, you can click on the database, and down here it says, when do I copy it to the output directory? That means the bin debug. Here it says, always. Got some other options like never. And finally, copy if newer. So what that's saying is just leave it alone, but if somebody changes, manually changes the one in the project folder, then copy it. I don't usually mess with this. If I wanted to test my program over and over and over again, I wouldn't use Visual Studio to do it. I would go into the executable bin folder and just run it from there. And now any changes I make, so that was Yves Beaupre, I changed him to a medium with mushrooms, save, leave, come back in again. Medium mushrooms, it sticks. Your program's working. It's a little disconcerting sometimes though. You delete 5 or 6 records, you come back after making a few changes to your code and the records are back. They're supposed to be. It's great for testing. Persistent data changes or non-persistent data changes, what they call it. Your changes don't stick. Your database gets replaced with the original every time you recompile your program. Questions? Then back to where we were before, we weren't getting any feedback when we were deleting. Because when we delete a record, it doesn't update the grid. Remember when we loaded our program, we said go out to the database, go into that little query XSD that's got just enough information and give me a copy of everything that's in there. We linked that to the binding source. So now the binding source is pointing to that data table, and that one doesn't go away. And when we're running this program, what's in this grid never gets updated as long as we're running. As soon as we kill the program, the next time through, it gives me a new copy of the grid, of the data that's in the database. But that's not good, because if I delete a record, now I can safely say, well, go ahead, delete Eve. Sure enough, off he goes. No, he doesn't. But if I delete him, I know he's going to come back the next time I run my program. But what I want to happen is when I hit delete, this row goes away. And if the row goes away, this better not say Eve Beaupre on 214 because that record doesn't exist anymore. When the row goes away, I want it to show the next one down in the list. How do I do that? Many years ago, after some significant research, I figured out a way to do that. We could, every time we delete a record, go back out to the database, grab that entire lookup query, suck the whole thing in, refill the grid, reconfigure. No, we don't need to do it. First of all, there might be thousands of records and we're wasting precious thousandths of a second loading that grid over and over and over again. What I discovered is that we can actually modify the grid, we, the programmer, modify the grid so that it always reflects what's in the database. Whenever I delete a record in the database, I delete the corresponding row in the grid. If I change the date that Eve ordered his pizza, that should change. There's a way to do it. If I change Eve's name because I misspelled it, it should update in the grid, but we are responsible for making those changes so that we don't have to go all the way out to the database and reload this grid just because I changed one letter. So we're going to make those changes. So a couple of things we want to worry about. If the date changes or the name changes, if the date or the name changes, we want to change them in the grid as well. And here's how we do that. We say grid, whatever row you're on right now, go to the customer name cell, change its value equal to whatever's on my form. When do we do that? Right after we save. The user might cancel. I don't want to change the grid ahead of time. I'm going to wait for him to hit save, then I'm going to update the grid. So in button save, after we're done saving, we're going to update the grid. If they change either one, again, how do I know which ones? I don't care. I don't know which one's changed. I don't care. Every time I hit save, I'm going to take whatever's on the form, I'm going to change the name, I'm going to change the date. That way, if they do change it, I caught it. If I don't, you won't even see the difference. So using what was in my notes, I'm going to say, hey, you Mr. Grid Select, give me your current row and give me the cell in that row. Was it cells? Yep. Give me the cell in that row that has this title. Now I've forgotten, is it customer or customer name? So I'm going to go look and load the grid, and it has the name of, it's not in the grid. To go to the XSD because I can't remember. And the names are customer. Okay, so that one. And order date. I have to know the right name. Give me the customer cell, change its value. Capital C in cells, it didn't catch it for me. There we go. Oops, wrong language, can't use apostrophes. The value, what do I want to make it? I want it to be whatever the first name, last name on the form are. So if the user typed in a new first name or typed in a new last name, I capture that. But in my grid, they're concatenated. Yep, I'm going to have to concatenate them here. So I'm going to take the text last name dot text, concatenate to that a comma and a space, concatenate to that the text first name dot text, done. So now what we're saying is, hey, we saved it. Maybe the name has changed. Even if it hasn't changed, copy the name from the form back into the grid so the grid always reflects what's on the form. Let's see if it works. So let's say that this is supposed to be Eve with an E. And the Beaupre has a Y on the end. When I hit save, what I expect to happen is that this name here will change to that. Uh-oh. Big important note. What's the problem? We got a read-only exception. The column customer is read-only in the grid, is what that's saying. Doesn't make it very clear, but it's talking about a column, which means the grid. It is read-only. It's a calculated field. And what the database and Visual Studio expect is it's a calculated field. You're probably not going to want to change that. But I do. I want to change it. I need to tell the XSD, hey, I'm going to bypass your normal behavior here. This customer field, notice the read-only is set to true. If we look at the other ones, order date, read-only is false because it's not calculated. That should be easy to change. Calculated fields by default in an XSD are read-only. So our job is to say, no, I don't want it to be read-only because I'm going to change it in the grid. Just change this. Bingo. It works. We need to do the same thing for the date because if I change this date, that's not happening yet. Save. The date didn't change. So we need to do the same thing for the date because here I have two columns displaying in my grid. If you only have one, then life is easy. If you got 2, 3 columns, depending on the program, you got to change every one of those. So in addition to doing this, I also want to change the grid select current row cells order date. Take what's in the date picker, transfer it into the grid. Notice that Eve is back again. It's my non-persistent data changes. Every time we change the program and run, recompile, rebuild, it automatically makes a copy of the original database, overwrites the one we were playing with, so we get a nice fresh copy. All right, so I want to change the date to today, and then I want to change Eve's name again to make sure both of these work in conjunction with each other. There's the date, there's the name, changes have been saved. Cool. Sort of. These dates are in descending order. If I change this to February, if I change it to February 12th, really the Eve Beaupre record should go in between here. But once again, it's not going to move. Change the date. But now everything's out of order. Big deal. The user can click on date, it'll resort it. Now, in my systems class yesterday, they were talking about user experience. That's not a good user experience. The user would expect that if the date is changed, it appears in the correct spot automatically. Your job, programmer. By the way, UX, user experience, is almost a degree in itself now in IT. It's another degree you could get in IT. So when you're done with software development, move on to networking and then security, user experience, database analyst. There's all kinds of, you can just keep going to school forever. Build up big bills. Other options, other career fields that are out there. Okay, so then what do we do? Well, if we want to resort, first we got to let's do the sorting and we'll come back and delete. Timing is right. If we want to refresh the grid sort order, we're going to tell the grid. Well, not exactly. We're going to tell the binding set. And this is why there is a binding set. Because the binding set allows me to programmatically resort. In order to do that, the first thing I have to do is tell the binding set, I'm done messing with you. If you're changing things like we just did with the names, if you're changing things, you're in an edit process and you can't resort. So I need to first tell it that I'm done changing things. So that happens underneath here. BS order lookup dot end edit. I believe it has parentheses. Yep. So that's the first step. Then I want to resort. Why do I have that in here? Oh, I know why. When I resort, guess what's going to happen to my record? It's going to move, right? Well, I can resort the grid, and I'll show you that. I'm going to put this in. I'm going to need a variable for that, so I'm going to create a variable. These are integers, right, because they're order IDs. So the old ID is equal to the order ID. And then I'm going to tell the binding set to resort. It's your problem. The name order ID does not exist in the current what? Uh-oh. Why can't it find my order ID? I'm in the GUI. Now the GUI wants to know, hey, business class, what's your order ID? Business class is going, I'm not telling you, that's a secret. It's encapsulated because we said no such thing. You don't have access. The GUI needs access. Needs to know the order ID that we're working on right now. We could bypass that, but this is the easy way to do it. I'm going to put that back. So that's not part of my business class again. And now the GUI is going to say, all right, I need that order ID from the business class. As long as I don't try to change it, everything's cool. If I can capitalize it right. Remember, it's read only. I'm asking for it, I'm not trying to change it. Then, you'll see why we need this in a second. Then I'm going to the binding set, BS order lookup, and I'm going to change the sort order. And you just make a string of what fields you want sorted, just like in SQL. I want to sort by the by the order date, descending, and then by last name. That should be plenty. See if that syntax looks right. Yep. Semicolon. Doesn't like my spelling, but that's not a problem. I think that'll resort it. So let's try that. I'm going to run it. I'm going to change this date to the 13th, or to the 12th, which means you should slide into there. 12th, save, and the sort property is not in the bind. There's no last name in there, so I got to sort by customer. That's what's wrong. We're talking about the binding set. There is no last name in the binding set. It's order ID, it's order date, and it's customer. Try that again. Change to the 12th. Save is good. There's the one that used to be the 14th. It's now in the correct position. But why isn't it selected anymore? Because we moved it. And as I moved it, now we picked a different one, which is at the top. Maybe that's okay with you. You hit save, you must be done with it. I moved it. But imagine if I moved that down about a year and somebody wanted to double check to make sure it worked or stay on that record. That's painful. So the last thing we need to do is get the grid to select the row we were on when we started, after or before we sorted these things. Need to get the grid to do that. And reselect the original record. Now again, a lot of this, if you're getting a little worried because it's kind of complicated, should be able to pretty much copy and paste, change the names of the fields. I want the DVD title. I want the car maintenance date. I want to sort by date, then by DVD or whatever. Just start changing the names. But the process is going to be pretty much the same. We have the old ID number. The last thing we're going to do now is tell the binding set to find that old one and make it the currently selected position. One line. Go find it. In this field, find that. And make that the current position. So, BS order lookup dot position. Not getting much IntelliSense here. What did I do wrong? The BS order lookup dot find. In the order ID column, find my old ID, the one that I remembered up here. As soon as I sort, the current record changes. So I have to capture that old ID before I sort, then use the old ID to go find that row wherever it is now and select it. So I picked the 12th. Again, I expect it to move down here, but what's different is I expect it to be selected. Magic. No. Code. So the kinds of user experiences you get more comfortable with as you use your own programs. This is why a lot of employers want to know, do you ever write any code for yourself? To manage your budget, to keep track of your kids' chores, to keep track of your DVD collection, your whatever. That's why I make some of these. But when you use your own programs, you go, man, I wish it would do this. And then you'll spend a couple, 3 days trying to figure out how to make it do it. You'll find one line of code that solves your problem, and it does it. And so that user experience is you using programs. User experience, it's a degree, but you know what? There's really not much to it. You've been a user of programs, many of you, all your life. And when programs don't behave the way you expect them to, you stop using the program, or if it's yours, you fix it. There are a lot of companies now that have user experience experts. Sounds like a great job to me. Play with other people's programs. Say, I don't like the way this works. Fix it. I don't even have to fix it. I just have to point it out. You, fix it. I can do that. It's a good job. So we're doing pretty good here. What's left? Inserting records. That's a little tricky. We're going to save that one for Unit 4. Persistent data changes, we already talked about. That's how the database just keeps copying over itself. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll do this field level validation. Right now in our business class, we have a constant that says that the maximum first name size, last name size are 15 and 25. What are they in the database? I don't know. I sure hope they match. Otherwise, my program is accepting 15 character first names and the database would take 20. I'm cutting them off before I'm even filling the field. Or worse yet, my program is allowing 15 and the database only allows 10. And now it's chopping stuff off. This one is very, very important. Because if you put more text into a field than it'll store, it just chops it off. Doesn't even tell you. It's not an error in Access. You type too much. Get a warning, and with our communication systems, we don't get that warning. So that one's very important. So we'll take a look at that when you come back, and what else? Nothing. You want to just do it? Need a break. Take a break.
Do it.
I got to know. Somebody's got to go to the bathroom.
Gotta
So
go to work. So.
let's take a break. Oh, you got to go. It won't take long. So.
Well, I gotta be out here by 2. If not just after.
All right, let's do. If you got to go, you got to go. But let's do JP a favor and let him get to work and hear this. Pretty straightforward. What we need to do is define a public static, meaning everybody shares it, function called max first name length. So somewhere down here, where do I put these? That's a good question. Let's collapse, see if I got a good range here. It's data access. I need information. So I'm going to say, let's write a method called getMax. So that'll go here. I'm going to skip the comments. Public static. There's only one maximum first name size. Every pizza order has the same value, just like we have a public static constant. Now we're going to have a public static method that everybody shares. It is going to return an integer. How big is the maximum size? Get the max first name length. What do? I create a data table. This is weird. I create a variable to a data table. Variable dt equals a new ds orders data table for table orders, that one. If you're not sure, look in the notes. Data table, new one. And then we simply ask the data table, what's the maximum size that you're allowing for the first name column? I don't even have to fill it with data. The data's got nothing to do with it. It's the field definition that's important. How many characters does it allow? This returns that. I'm immediately going to return it. So I'm going to say, hey, you, Mr. Data Table, what is the max? That's not right. What is the customer first name column dot max length? Parentheses? No. That's it. Shouldn't I do soda? I could. In my business class, not a bad idea. It's text. How do I know the user class, the GUI, is going to use a combo box to get the soda? Maybe they're going to let them type it. If they do, then I better watch out. We're using a combo box. There's no way for the user to screw that up and make it too long because they have to pick from the combo box. And actually, do I need this? No. Why not? I got a list of acceptable sodas. Those better be in range. So I have a list of acceptable sodas. There's no way I'm going to accept anything that's not on that list. So no, I don't really need this. But it would be exactly the same, right? Just change the column name. That's all you got to do. Now we don't need that one. So I'm going to pull it out because I have an array that helps me validate it. Now I have these, what do I do with them? In the GUI, form load is where we set the max size. Where'd it go? Probably in here. Right there. This was the constant. I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to say instead, get, what happened to my IntelliSense? Max first name length. Because that's the name of my function, my method. Get the last name length. And just to prove that this works, I'm going to go take the constants out. When you're building your unit 2s, you can put those right away. You can use this function right away. You don't have to wait till unit part 3 or wherever it shows up. And where else am I using it? Oh, in the class. And in the error message. I'm just changing all of these to gets. Press Control Space, it capitalizes it right for you. That's why it didn't work before. This one's got a capital G. Did I put capital G's on both of them? Yep. So I mistyped it over here. No, it fixed it for me. So now there's no more constants. I commented them out. $10. Looks like it's 15. Maybe I mistyped one. Yeah, I got a couple extra numbers. It's 15. There's extra numbers in there. And it stopped. So it's still working. And now I'm asking, basically I'm asking the database, the data class, how big is the first name column? How big is the last name column? I don't have to have constants. And if you change it in the database, it should change in the XSD automatically, and I don't have to change my constant. So that's the last final touch. Last thing I need from you, part 3, because we're done with unit 3. Good news is you've got 2 hours of lab coming, and all of next week is lab. All of spring break is lab. You don't have to come. I promise not to lecture while you're done. It's like 3 weeks of lab. You should be done with this program by then. Part 6 will be done. Maybe not. Let's set a date. Part 3 simply adds what we just did. Adds the null processing, adds the cancel, delete, fix the grid by resorting it and changing the text. That's all it really does. So it's not a whole lot more complex. Yes, we set part 2. The Tuesday after break. No. Oh, thank you. Darn. JP, you're never going to get out of here. How do we fix the grid here? Same thing. I think we just better go check my notes because you're right. I gotta make sure you get that right. Saving, null, delete. Grid select, remove, and then click the grid because when I remove one, we might not need that last step. Let's find out. So grid select rows.remove, the current row. Grid select, still got no IntelliSense. Should be all it needs. Let's find out. Click on, let's get rid of Ryan Braun again, delete. He should disappear, and what I expect to happen is a different row is going to be selected. And it did. It happened automatically. That second line doesn't seem to be necessary, but then I also said that we didn't need property in the grid or in the business class. And then later found out I did. I don't see it here. It seems to be working. Try one more thing. I bring in more Ryan Braun records and delete them all. Delete. Like Ryan Braun anymore. Delete. Delete. What happens when I delete the last one? It should still function, but his record stays here. That's normal when you delete the last one. We're going to take care of that in part 5 or 6 in Unit 4. But my program didn't crash when I deleted the last one. That's what I was concerned about. So I don't think that this line is necessary. I think because it's grid selection changed, the grid changed. It executes automatically. We don't have to tell it to. All right. Back to due date. Database part 3.
16th.
16th, which is what? A week later? A week plus more?
It's that Thursday.
It's a week. This is when your 2 is due as the 7th.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a week plus a couple.
Week plus 2.
Honestly, with the way my life is now, it doesn't make any difference. You can turn them, if they're due the 14th, I'm not going to grade them until Saturday. You turn them in before I grade them, I can't tell the difference.
16th.
So let's go with 16th. You can always turn them in early. When we come back from break, I'm starting part 4. We got like 7 weeks left when we come back. It doesn't sound like much. So these due dates, at some point, they're going to get kind of squished at the end. So if you're worried about that, turn them in early. This is just the due date. There's nothing stopping you from turning them in early. I get the feeling that a couple of you, I've turned you off to turning in early because I give you a grief. Stop. If you're done, turn it in. I think some of you are waiting and sitting on assignments that have been done for 3 or 4 days just because you don't want to give them to me too early. It's not painful, is it, Joni? I don't yell at you too much when you turn stuff in early. Sometimes I say, I don't know, I don't have an evaluation sheet. May not get this back for a while, but in here I have the evaluation sheets. Okay, end of recording. You were in lab for all kinds of time now, so make good use of it. Make good use of that lab.